Dude, you are getting well. Dude.
Hello, sir.
Hello, welcome everyone who's listening. Welcome men, welcome leaders, and welcome Andrew Horn. I am so grateful to have you here today. Andrew is an entrepreneur, speaker, facilitator, and writer, and someone who I met at an adult camp in the Hudson Valley with code names and probably like barely clothed. And since then, you have you've really become an inspiration, and you've continued to show up in my life as a leader, an entrepreneur, speaker, facilitator, writer, and especially the work you've done with men and just who you are as a man today. So I just want to say thank you and welcome.
Thanks for having me, man. That intro got me excited for moving down to Nosara next month.
Yes, that's where it was filmed.
I thought I looked at it, I was like, oh yeah, I know that brain.
Yeah, it reminds me of where to go. Yeah, to head back.
You know what Nosara is. Nosara is one of the best beginner surf breaks on the planet in the northwest coast of Costa Rica.
That's true. Yeah, big shout out to that place. And also great land that is much of the jungle is protected by the government, and a lot of the locals work to take care of the animals in the local land there, which is why I love it so much too.
Little known fact about Costa Rica: they are one of 2 countries in the world that has no standing army.
I love that.
I always love that too.
It's another great reason to go support them. I'm like, I'll give you my money. You're not going to use it on war. That's awesome. So Andrew, I'm curious, what had you say yes to being here today?
I think your intention behind it and your desire to work with, to support men, all people, but I think men especially in this practice of personal development, self-care, personal evolution is a cause and kind of something that's very close to my own heart. And so, anytime we have an opportunity to talk about ideas and best practices and strategies for helping men to become all the people they can be and contribute and take care of others, like, game on, let's do it.
That's awesome. Do you have anyone, and thank you so much for that too. Thank you for saying yes. Do you have anyone in your life that supports you and being all of those things for yourself today?
Yeah, so I'm very fortunate. A lot of the work that I do in my Junto retreats, one of our quintessential exercises is around identifying like the male relationships that are most important to you in your life. And without giving away so much of what we do in those retreats, there's an exercise that allows us to basically identify how well we're showing up in those relationships. And there's a script that allows us to reach out and kind of deepen those relationships, bring them into a place of kind of mutual support. And so I've been very actively focused on cultivating relationships with men specifically that support all sides of me, and then I get to support all sides of them. And just last night I had a men's group. So I was in a weekly men's group for 5 years in New York, and then I just moved here to Texas. And so I started a new group with 8 men who are here. And just last night, it was a really cathartic, very intense night for the guys, which can happen. And at the end of it, we do a checkout. And during the checkout, I just remember sitting there and I was like, wow, it's so nice to be reminded that I don't need to hold this weight on my own. Is that men who are here to hold me in the challenges of life that are inevitable, and also that I get to really hold the same space for them and whatever challenges may come up for them.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. I would love to be a part of that, and I love the work that you're doing. Why do you do this work? What has you lead this work?
The path to men's work started with this deep fascination of communication and interpersonal dynamics that was born out of really my own need and my own pain. I grew up in Hawaii in public schools. And so, when I was growing up there, they were the 50th ranked public school. And a lot of people don't know this per se, but there's actually like a lot of discrimination that happens towards white kids in public schools. And so there's a term called a haole. And so I just had this experience of experiencing some racial discrimination and just being isolated from my community and feeling really lonely when I was younger. And the pain of that led to a lot of shyness and a lot of social anxiety, just not really feeling like I belonged. And so as I started to grow into adulthood through high school and through college, I became so fascinated with like, hey, I know the pain of being alone and it fucking sucks. And how can I build a toolkit that allows me to simply connect with people, to build friendships? And so I became obsessed with that, and in its infancy in high school, that's just trying to be a popular kid and trying to party and trying to hit on girls. And then, you evolve and realize that some of those things are actually quite unrewarding and unfulfilling. And so it's how do I start to build meaningful relationships and pursue things that I care about? And so I've always been just deeply passionate about communication, because I think that for me, communication is the foundation for meaningful connection. Every meaningful relationship that you have started because there was one conversation sparked somewhere at some time. And so I was introduced to this communication modality called gestalt awareness practice in 2017. And so gestalt therapy is a therapeutic modality that kind of fell out of favor in the 1980s. But the awareness practice is this very non-dogmatic communication practice that was popularized at the Esalen Institute. So for those of you who don't know what the Esalen Institute is, it's really kind of one of the first and foremost retreat centers on the planet advocating for human development. And so the human potential movement that was started in the 1960s around kind of like the hippie area, like you're thinking of Alan Watts, you're thinking of Ram Dass, and you're thinking of all of these people who are on the forefront of the human potential movement, was really coalesced at Esalen. And
I didn't even know that. I've taught some workshops at Esalen, but I didn't know how much power it had as like one of those first places. And you can feel the magic in the land there.
Yeah, totally.
And that people are there to show up for something. But that's really cool that there's actually a birthplace of something like that.
A lot of people call it the religion of no religions, was like the non-dogma of Esalen. And so, you can imagine that there's this point in time really in the 60s and 70s where so many of the greatest thinkers of our time were coming together to this place to talk about human potential, to talk about our frame of reality and what's happening, to talk about where we can go next. And so Gestalt was introduced as a facilitation and communication framework to help people to communicate in ways that were ultimately productive and honest and connecting. And so Gestalt awareness practice is based around these simple ideals of authenticity, curiosity, and presence. You can think about that as basically everything that you're thinking and feeling is real and valid and deserving of a voice. That's authenticity. Curiosity is just going into situations wanting to understand the person across from you and yourself at the deepest level possible. And presence, of just being fully present in this moment. And I got invited to partake in this kind of week-long training for Gestalt communication for leaders. And it's a funny story of how I ended up there. Someone saw me talking to people at a conference and said, "Hey, have you heard of this thing called Gestalt communication?" I said, "No." He said, "I see you doing it." He's like, I run this big ad agency and I'm a benefactor of this modality because it's not very popular. It's kind of esoteric and a lot of people know about it. And so kind of like there might be a collector of an artist who wants to like maintain their legacy and spread it to the world. He is basically this connoisseur of this communication modality and believes in its ability to connect people and to like create meaningful connection in the world. And so he actually paid for me to go to Cleveland to take this week-long training. And as soon as I got there, I realized that for so much of my life, I had been focused on techniques and tools and tactics to communicate and to connect. But that ultimately so much of those tools and techniques were just a cover for me not really believing in myself, not trusting myself. And so I needed all of these things to feel like I could go and have the impact on people that I wanted to have. And when I went into this Gestalt communication workshop, I realized that the most powerful thing I can do in any moment is simply being who I am, being real with whatever my experience is in that moment. And, no one ever teaches us how to do that elegantly. And that's exactly what this practice did. And so, I had this experience of, we were talking about stories before this, so I learned these principles. And whenever I go to a personal development workshop, I always have this frame, which is like, as soon as I step through this door, I'm going to like drop my ego, and whatever you're telling me to do, I just want to try it on fully. Like, get rid of the resistance. Let's go play in this new sandbox and see what happens. And so at one of the first retreats, I had been trying to talk to this other young person who was at this gestalt training. And she runs this cool media company. And we were two of the younger people who were there. And so I was like trying to make inroads with her and trying to talk to her. And I don't know if you've ever had this experience, Ben, but like, you're trying to talk to someone and they're just not into it. They're just not giving you the time of day, but they're kind of giving you the cold shoulder. They're disinterested, and it feels really bad. And I was like, why doesn't, like, we should be homies. Like, we have something happening here. And so they introduce these principles, right, of authenticity. Anything that you're feeling is real and valid and deserving of a voice. And so at the first break, I go over to the coffee machine, and this woman walks up to me. And I remember I was like, well, what am I feeling right now? I was like, oh, I'm not feeling good. I'm not feeling connected. I have an assumption she's not interested in being friends with me. And so I just was like, all right, let's do it. So she walks over and I said, hey, Megan, I've been trying to connect with you. I love what you're building. And I just haven't felt really the energy coming back, or that you're interested in it, which is totally cool. And I just wanted to let you know that I'm probably going to stop trying to, make this connection. If you're ever interested in talking, let me know. And I'd love to do that. And as soon as I say that to her, she just starts bawling right in front of me. And I'm like, what did I do? What's happened? I did something wrong? And then she goes into, my boyfriend is breaking up with me. My co-founder is suing me. I don't even want to be here. And I just realized with such clarity that like I had this whole narrative architected about who she was and what was happening between us. It was just a story. And that simply sharing what was real for me gave her an opportunity to share what was real for her in that moment. And it unlocked that entire experience for her, because then she came in and told everyone else what was going on for her. And I said, let's just play with that the entire week and just share exactly what's real. And what I noticed, and what became so liberating for me as a teacher and as a facilitator, is that our authenticity, being ourselves, is not about something for us. Is that when we are authentic, when we are who we are, we create space for other people to do the same thing. And that's what I experienced that weekend, is simply by committing to being who I was, not putting on a facade, not needing to package it for someone else, that other people felt permission to do the same thing. And I knew that that was so much more important to me than packaging an idea in some tightly knit package, or being perceived anyway by someone else. And so my whole kind of practice as a coach and as a trainer really started to shift. And, I started to realize, even with my own kind of male friends, that so much of our conditioning around just a resistance to vulnerability, being kind of like such a solo entity, kept us from sharing the whole truth, the full spectrum experience of being a dude. And so I started a men's group using these principles to help a group of 8 of my friends to connect. And I remember the first session, we just walked out of it, and one of my friends said, I feel so much less alone. And that was exactly how I felt. And I realized that providing these types of spaces for men to share the entire truth of what they're experiencing and understanding who they are and giving them opportunities to be real about that is incredibly transformative and cathartic. And that's what got me into it. And that's why I do that. It's because I think that providing these types of spaces for men to be real about what they're experiencing provides really exponential opportunities for growth and collective contribution in the world.
I could not agree more. And what a beautiful story. I'm really moved by that. And, it's proof time and time again. One of the greatest things I love about doing this podcast is an opportunity to get real with people, and for someone like you to get real and like to actually practice. Like, can we get some of the leaders of the world to really be real with us, so that we can see we don't have to like, carve out our Instagram face with a plastic surgeon in order to finally be accepted. We could actually share our most like nasty, secret, like ugliest stuff, and that can be also beautiful and loved, and that after sharing it, that someone will also say, not only like, hey, I still love you, or you haven't died yet, but like, actually, me too. But if we don't share it, then we don't know. And I just had this example as I was sharing with a friend last week. My wife and I recently had a miscarriage, and I shared it with one of my best friends, and he started crying, like right there, similar to what you were saying. And he said, we had one. I said, I'm sharing about because we don't talk about this. And that's when he started crying. He said, we had one too, and he has 2 kids now. And I said, wow, I never knew that. When did that happen? He said 6 years ago. And I said, wow, you've been carrying this for 6 years. You haven't told a single person aside from your wife. And also, he felt like he didn't deserve to grieve in that way because his wife went through most of it physically, mentally, emotionally. But, as I reminded him, if we care about anything that we lose or it feels like a traumatic event, it still affects us, whether or not it's directly to us or not. And just an opportunity to say we're not okay or that this happened, I think can give us so much permission. So thank you so much for reminding us of that. Were you raised with that permission, like in your environment or from your parents? Did they encourage your authenticity and vulnerability and all of that?
I felt very loved and supported. I think that I just got through the Hoffman process very recently, which is kind of like a really storied personal development retreat that they do in California and Connecticut. And it's all based around deeply inspecting the patterns, negative behaviors that we experience from our parents growing up, and understanding how those really kind of like imprinted onto us and how we show up in the world. And so I always like to say, it's like I feel and felt so loved and supported by my parents. And at the same time, they were operating at the frame of consciousness that was available to them when I was, in my coming of age years. And so they still wanted me to be a certain way that they felt was going to keep me safe in society. And so, there was definitely some imprinting of how to be in the world. But I do think that I was fortunate to have permission to feel like ultimately, and like feeling loved and experiencing physical touch in like beautiful, healthy ways from both of them. And so I had that growing up. And I think, so much of it was my mom is an author who focuses in the realm of communication. And so when I talked initially about, how those techniques and those tools of interpersonal dynamics, effective communication were so helpful in getting me to achieve the type of results that I wanted socially. It's like when I became obsessed with being popular and having friends and kind of like picking up women, I became very adept at those things and I could do them, and I built a community. But again, it was because I had a lot of tactics and tools that were layered on top of a bunch of really shitty beliefs about who I was, and a distrust that who I was okay, deserving of love, deserving of admiration, deserving of respect. And so, I over-rotated onto a lot of those communication things for a long time.
I like that word, over-rotated.
Yeah,
it's like going from...
And nothing against those things, because they're incredibly powerful to know how to, deliver a TED Talk and ask great questions and understand how the structure of story of like, it's beautiful. Communication is an art form. But ultimately what's most interesting to me is kind of personal liberation and freedom to be whoever you are. And that's like a process that is ongoing and quite infinite. And that, what I find is that if we do that deeper work around identity of who we think we are, what are our values, how we want to show up in the world, that if we do that work, kind of really deeply that the type of communication, the type of connection, the type of impact that we're after will flow so much more naturally and with so much less effort. And so that's where a lot of my effort has been shifted.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. You mentioned, the times when, and it's so beautiful that you had that fortune of and privilege of having such a loving environment at home. And you mentioned some beliefs that you're really struggling with yourself in the past. What were, like, coming into adulthood, what would you say was the most challenging negative belief or mindset that you had about yourself, and what was the process to letting go of that, or maybe you still carry it today? Maybe that's the one that's still there for you today.
I'll talk about what I would think of as like a core wound, which is a little more ambiguous and colors everything. I think that the concept of the core wound is very helpful in navigating our own personal development journey.
Sure.
But the one that is more practical and identifiable and probably more relatable is I was a really good student until around 7th grade. And then I became much more interested in social activities and pretty much abandoned like all academic pursuits. And so I was a pretty poor performing student. That's like I graduated from high school with like a 2.2, finagled my way into a bad college, and then went to Virginia Tech and ended up, graduating from there with a 3.0 by I don't even know how. But like I was not a great student, and I always held this belief that I was not smart. And so this was my narrative. And just an example, because I think it might be helpful for people to apply this to their own lives, of like a really beautiful piece of work that I get to do with a lot of clients and a lot of people that I work with is this idea of our social identity. And our social identity is really like who we think that we are and who we think other people think that we are. And that could be that people think that I'm unattractive. People think that I'm weird. People think that I'm not smart. People think that I'm not good at X, whatever that might be. But it's basically this narrative that's present on repeat. And when we have this type of belief, it really does color just about every experience that we have. Because what happens is that when we have a limiting belief like that that's present, that I'm not smart, what we will do is we will evidence collect in every situation to show ourselves that that is true. Because the brain really likes certainty. So anytime something happens that could be colored as I'm not smart, which is like me at like my first company not getting a grant, which is someone rejecting me in a social situation, like I'm going to go ahead and say like, oh, see, that's another feather in the cap of I'm not smart. And so what happened is, so I had this narrative, this program that was running all the time. Like, even though I was able to go to a good school, even though I was able to start my own nonprofit when I was 24, but at events that I would go to, I have this story that I'm not smart. And so much of what I'm trying to do is to cover for that, right? Is trying to say things that will make people think that I'm smart, is looking for external validation to help me feel like I actually am smart, like I am fundamentally enough to over rotate and kind of counteract that story. And so that was one that really impacted how I showed up in social situations for a long time. That was one that led to a lot of social anxiety, a lot of insecurities, different ones that would show up as like, I'm not funny, right? So it's like, I can't be silly or permission to do that because that's not something that I am. So those would be two identities that I would grapple with and then I needed to counteract for. And if I think that I'm not smart, if I think that I'm not these things, what happens is that we're constantly in a pattern of seeking external validation to prove us wrong. Because if I have that belief, I believe that, like, it's very hard for me to do something that's going to flip the switch into like, well, no, like actually I am smart. Like I am enough. Like I am funny at times. And so that would be one that was really present. And I think what's helpful for people that, it's fun to talk about a story like this and how I ultimately started to overcome something like this, which again, like I had a lot of tools and a lot of techniques that, even though these insecurities and these limiting beliefs were present, I learned a lot of tools to go into high achieving rooms of people, very successful individuals, and to connect, because I knew how to ask questions, because I studied how to talk effectively about a business, about how to ask for money, about how to, actually make introductions, to curry favor with people and build deeper connections. And so I was able to do a lot of these things and achieve success, but it was all on top of this layer of insecurity and self-doubt, that I needed to achieve external results to comfort that. And so I think that what's really helpful for anyone who desires to be confident in their life is to start by understanding, like, what are the beliefs that I hold about who I am and how other people perceive me, and to literally just write down the dialogue. Like, if you were to start there, because like whatever that fundamental story is that we have about ourselves, it's there every day. It's there all the time. We're just not aware of it because it's so on repeat and it's so in our subconscious. And if you were to just take this week and notice, like, what are the fucked up things that I say to myself? Like, what are the mean things that I'm saying subconsciously? And actually just keep a dialogue. And if you just write down what the inner dialogue is, you'll notice these things that you're saying about yourself. And once you have some of this written down, you can see, like, oh, what are these limiting beliefs that I hold about myself? And then what you also get to do once you've identified those is to actually look at, like, well, what are the beliefs that I hold about myself on the positive side? Like, what are the beliefs that I hold about myself about, like, who I know I am with people and who and how other people perceive me? And the reason that it's so important to articulate these and take time to do it is because our brain, first and foremost, is wired to keep us safe. And like, we are social animals. Like, our brains are wired to connect, to fit in. It's like the danger of being kicked out of our tribes, like from the time that we were like much simpler, kind of like vertical animals, is very palpable, right? It's like if you're kicked out of your tribe, it's like you're not going to be there for the hunt. You have much less lower likelihood of survival. And so our brain is wired to help us to fit in more than anything else, because it doesn't want us to die. And that's still what we're responding to. And so by telling us all the reasons that we are not good, that we are not enough, that we are not lovable, it triggers the response of, I will go and do that thing. I will prove to you that I am. Because it's an effective motivating device, but also just doesn't feel great. It doesn't feel great. It's not that effective ultimately. So we can go in and we start to articulate, like, what are some of the beliefs that I hold about myself? And this is like, what are beliefs that I hold about myself? And number one is like, oh, I'm like a really kind person. Oh, I really care about people. Like, oh, I have a network of interesting people, that like the people who are in my friend group feel really good around me. Like, I'm actually like quite fun. Like, I love, like, so it's like, these are things that like I know to be true about myself, right? So it's the more that I'm aware of these beliefs that I have about myself that I think are positive, it's like now I'm looking for evidence of those things, and there's a natural confidence that arises from those. And so, that was one of the dialogues that was present early in my professional career. And we've talked a little bit about the internal dialogue and then articulating one on the positive side, which we very rarely give ourselves the opportunity to do. And ultimately, like, what I would say is, the core wound is this idea of like, what is like the fundamental story for you that colors your reality? And the one for me, which is like funny to even say it, is the idea of like not enoughness, which is like, what is not enoughness? It's this term that kind of doesn't even make sense. Not enough for what, right? It's really just a sensation that like, I am not good enough to achieve the things that I want to achieve, to connect the way that I want to connect. And like, it's a trope, right? It's like some of these deeper core wounds that people have. It's like, I'm not lovable. Like, I'm not enough. Like, we go back and forth.
Yeah, does sound very familiar.
And so, and that wiring is there because it's this primal motivating force that when our brain is telling us that we're not enough of something, our first instinct is oftentimes just to go and like prove it wrong, right? And so while it's a seemingly effective motivational device, like, I think that a lot of people get to a place later in life and they say like, I don't want to play that game anymore. And
It's like beating yourself up in order to try to motivate yourself, like just whipping yourself harder.
Totally. And so while it does work, it's not sustainable and it's not a whole lot of fun and it doesn't feel great. And so I think that so much of this work starts with really saying, it's like, okay, well, what is that dialogue that's present, and allowing ourselves to become aware of how the subconscious is imprinting to our present moment experience. And from that place, we get to craft like, well, okay, if these are the things that I've held about myself, like these limiting beliefs, like, what are the empowering beliefs on the other side? Like, what do I know to be true about who I am, right? and actually just becoming aware of those. And another way to architect our own identity is like, well, what are our values, right? It's like, what do I value? How do I like to show up with people? I know I like to be curious. I know I like to be authentic. I know I like to be kind. And so now, rather than needing external validation to prove a limiting belief wrong, we have these things that are intrinsic, that we know about ourselves, that we can use to drive our own behavior. And so, one of the things that I oftentimes teach is called social flow. And it basically takes the principles of a flow state, which you're familiar with because you're a surfer, right? A flow state.
Yeah.
You're completely absorbed in what you're doing. There's no reference of you doing the thing. You are just doing it. Like time stands still. It seems like things are moving slower and you have hyper focus to move around and do what you need to do. New energy, new power to like raise to new levels of performance. And I think that, well, it's not that I think, it's like actually like Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who wrote the book on flow, he talks about one of the primary attributes of creating flow states is what he calls intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is that you're just doing something because you want to do it. And one of my favorite words is autotelic, which is something that is done for the sake of doing it. Right? It's like, so intrinsic, it means that like, I'm doing this for me, like not necessarily to achieve. It's the act itself is rewarding. I don't need something else to happen there to do this thing. And when we give ourselves some of those intrinsic motivators, empowering beliefs, values, like again, the type of action that we want flows so much more effortlessly and also without the need for external validation, which is ultimately the cause of all of our social anxiety and shyness, is because we need other people to perceive us some way. And as soon as we find a way to detach from that need, the world opens up and confidence starts to flow much more freely and effortlessly.
Well, that sounds great. What are some of the ways you practice that in your life today?
So I think of social flow as a habit, like anything, right? It's like, we are not what we do, we are what we do consistently. And so the easiest way to practice social flow is to create a ritual around how you are interacting and showing up with other people. And so simply put, like if you wanted to start doing this, I would say that the first thing to do is to really do this part around the social identity first, which is, what are my limiting beliefs? Like creating an actual list of what are the mean things that I say about myself. And then going on to the empowering side, like literally get a piece of paper and what are my empowering beliefs? Like what are the things that I hold to be true about myself that I think are positive? So do that. And then just go ahead and take some time to actually create, like, what are your values about how do I want to show up with people to be me in the world? Like, what are those? Let's call them your relational values. Okay. So we start with that social identity. We're recreating, that's step one. Like do that, do not start, go. That's where we start. And then we come into the practice, right? Like, how do we turn this not to something that like we just do once or twice, but how do we create the habit of it and the ritual? And so I have a framework called I can. You can remember I can in any situation, right? So I'm getting ready to go on a podcast with Ben. So I'll just practice like social flow through I can. And it stands for intentionality, curiosity, authenticity, now. Intentionality, curiosity, authenticity, now. And if you go through this, it takes you 60 seconds. And what it will do is it will focus your awareness onto your intrinsic motivators to be in conversation, right? And like, this is another important point. I'm going to repeat something here, which is that the source of all social anxiety is relying on external validation to tell us who we are. Is we are relying on something outside of us to calm our internal state. That's it. And so the simplest way that we can alleviate social anxiety, shyness, create confidence is to focus our awareness internally. And so we do that through intentionality first, right? Which is, I'm coming onto your show and I say, okay, how do I want to feel? Right? How do I want to feel to be Andrew? And I say, I want to be alive. I want to be present. I want to have fun. Alive, present, and have fun. So now my awareness is coming inside. Even as I say it, I get goosebumps, right? So rather than thinking about like, oh, here's the thing that I want to say, and like, I wonder what this is all coming in and like how I'm going to do, like now I'm just focused on how I want to be, how I want to feel. So that intentionality before any situation is one of the simplest things that we can do to get started. So the next thing that we do is focus on curiosity. Is that so much of our social anxiety is just the result of self-conscious rumination. Self-conscious rumination is just thinking about ourselves way too much. And so the antidote to thinking about ourselves too much is curiosity. It's thinking about, whether it's someone else, right? So if I'm coming into a conversation with Ben, I'm going on a date, I'm getting ready for even like a keynote presentation, is to ask ourselves, what do I want to know about this person? Is actually allowing our mind to focus less on us and more on what do we want to know about the other person, right? And so it's not about what are the best questions to ask. The best question to ask is always about whatever you want to know. That is the best question. People ask me to give keynotes on how to ask great questions. I was like, that's not it. It's about curiosity. That's the question to ask, is like, what do I want to know about Ben? And then whatever questions do that justice. So now what I've done is I focused on my intrinsic motivation to be here. I focus on my curiosity, what I want to know about the other person. So I'm not thinking about myself. The next one is authenticity, which we can think about as, what am I feeling? What am I excited to share? And so again, by just turning the lens internally and asking ourselves, well, how am I feeling? A lot of people have never actually taken the time to understand what their feelings are, how they show up in their body. And so they're looking for other like abstract ideas and things to talk about in conversation, because they don't trust that whatever they're feeling, whatever their experience is something that they can share or that they feel comfortable sharing elegantly. And so actually just like, how am I feeling, right? Coming into this, grappling with that.
And I love that you said, and how am I feeling in my body?
Yeah.
Too. Like, not many people ask themselves that question either.
Well, you want to know and why that's important? And I was just going to get here.
Yeah.
It's the quickest way to engineer trust with someone else is to share our emotionality through the lens of physical reference in our body. Think about this. It's like we're biologically engineered as humans to respond to emotion. Before we were verbal, before we were we were even verbal. If something important was happening, we needed to connect, we needed to communicate a message. And the way that we would do that was through emotionality that was present purely in our bodies. And this feeling when you're in conversation, you feel it. Just notice this next time you're in a conversation. But I promise you this, next time you're in a conversation and halfway through, you find yourself like looking at your phone, looking around the room, like what's happening, that person is not sharing an emotion that's present for them. They're talking about some abstract idea. But the next time that you're in a conversation where you talk about your miscarriage and your buddy is crying, you know where you are? You are right there and you can't look away. When someone is sharing emotion that is real for them in the moment, we are biologically hardwired to be present with that person. That's why we talk about presence as one of these quintessential values of confidence. And so if we can start to learn what are our emotions, and we can start to learn how to trust those and to share them elegantly and not to basically frame them as a burden to someone else, but when we can learn how to acknowledge our emotional experience and express that when we do that, that is one of the quickest ways to make people trust us, because they know that it's real. And that trust and that safety is, again, like the foundation for the deepest type of connection. And so that's why when I think about authenticity, of learning how to navigate and connect with our emotional experience, and if you don't want to go that deep with the emotions, I also give you the opportunity to say, well, what am I excited to talk about? What do I want to contribute? What's happening in your life that's interesting to you, where you're just reminding yourself again before a conversation that there are things in my frame that are alive for me, that are exciting, that I want to share. So again, you're not waiting for someone else to have a conversation. So you just know, you're reminding yourself that there are things in my universe that I'm excited to contribute. So now you're walking into that conversation with intentionality. How do I want to feel? Curiosity, an understanding of what you want to learn about the other person. So it's not even about you. Authenticity, a connection with what's real for you in this moment and what you're excited to share, absent whatever you're going into. So you have something to contribute. And the last one is just now. And now means that, again, it's so often in conversations in our relationships, we are worried about what's going to happen next, that we'll say something and someone will retract or leave the conversation. They won't like us, or we're carrying a story about like who we are from the past. And if we can allow ourselves to just come back to what is happening right now, we don't have room for the stories that create our anxiety. Because again, like our anxiety, for the most part, is a prediction of what the future holds. Think about that for a second. Our anxiety is a prediction about what the future holds. It comes from some sort of subconscious belief that something bad is going to happen. Someone's not going to like what you said. Someone's not going to connect with this. Something's going to go wrong. And if we're truly present, I'm just looking into your eyes. I'm looking over at me in my big shiny red jacket. There's no fear here because we're just here. The fear is attached to a story about what's going to happen next. And so that's how you put it into practice. And it's literally 60 seconds.
What a relief. That's awesome. I feel immediately relieved just by hearing this and the reminder that I don't have to be anywhere else because I'm holding a podcast right now. It actually wouldn't be appropriate for me to be anywhere else. Yes. But just in you sharing from this, I'm brought to that moment right here and experiencing that. And I love this access to it. I took note of it here, Andrew, because it's really powerful. And I love the authenticity and curiosity that you bring to it. And like, you're obviously a brilliant dude, and whether or not you tell yourself otherwise, and you have a lot of fun. And so I want to talk a little bit about that too. Like, you know, leadership and success doesn't have to look like working around the clock. And one of the things I love is I keep discovering, like, one of my favorite places to go play, like, oh, Andrew's been there, or like, you know, I'll go somewhere else and be like, oh, they're here. So I was like, okay, universe, I'm listening. I guess I'm going to start like learning more about these people. And so it's so great to have you here. You're in Austin right now. You talked about going to Costa Rica soon and the Hudson Valley here in Rhinebeck. How do you do all this? And can you walk me through like a day in the life of Andrew and like business and pleasure and relationship and parenting and all that stuff?
You know, it comes back. So we talked about like social identity before, and I'm gonna now like parlay this over to just like life. Is like what's so important to unlock the type of behavior that we want is connecting with, understanding, and embracing our identity. This is the authentic self. This is who we know ourselves to be. So again, the most effective way to unlock sustainable confidence is to understand who we are, to understand how we need to operate, to express ourselves, to be ourselves in conversation. That's like our values. Those are our empowering beliefs. Is that when you do that, it's going to unlock the type of behavior that you want effortlessly. And I think that similarly in life, like how do we unlock the type of behavior that is going to lead to us expressing ourselves and creating the type of life that we want? It starts with identity again, which is like, I surf a lot. I have a lot of fun and I host a lot of events and I do these things. And all of that stems from a deep, deep fundamental awareness about the importance of adventure and deep connection in my life, right? I understand that to be me in the world, those things need to be expressed, right? And if you're curious, like, again, this is a practice that any of you could do, which is just like, I think that values work is some of the most neglected work in personal development and some of the most powerful. For any of you out here who are running a company, what's the first thing that you do when you're creating a culture? Your values, right? Because what do values do? They direct the company and your employees' attention onto the types of behaviors that are celebrated here. So it's like, why would we not have a crystal clear awareness of those in our personal life? And a way to actually do that.
Yes, well said.
Right?
Yeah, we're ignoring that. It's like, oh, we got it in our business, but why aren't you applying that anywhere else in your life?
Totally. And so the way that shows up for me is an awareness of, again, like adventure and community as these like foundational virtues of a good life for me. And so once I understand that, you know, I understand like how to balance my life, like what I need to make happen to know that those aspects of me are being expressed, right? And like when I'm unhappy, like, and this is again like a game that we could play. It's like in any moment that you're unhappy, like you could just look at your values, and a fun barometer for how we're doing in life is when you are feeling good, especially when you're at peak states of being, means that your values are being expressed. And when you are not feeling good, it is oftentimes a direct result of your values not being expressed. And so again, it's
I
like,
think that's worth saying again. Will you just say that one more time?
it's that if a very effective barometer to evaluate like why you are feeling the way you are is when you are feeling great, peak experience of life, you're in flow, it means that your values are actively being expressed in your life. And when you're in the valley, when you're in the dumps and you're not feeling great, it is very likely a cause of your values not being expressed. And that's again why it's so helpful to understand what our core values are. And I oftentimes say that it's helpful when you build a list like this. It's like 10 would be the max that I would think of. And I oftentimes think that 5 or 6 is like an optimal amount to be able to remember like very acutely. And I have a whole practice of actually how to do this on my website. But so how do I do this? Like, why do I have so much, travel in my life? Why do I have so many like community gatherings? It's because I'm very intentional about like how I set up time to do this, right? It's like my free time. I very rarely go to just like a party. It's like when I'm hanging out with people, I understand that like, one-on-ones with people is going to be more nourishing for my soul more time. Like intentional gatherings, whether it's like I'm hosting or friends are doing them, are going to be more ecstatic experiences that are kind of like, better for me. It's like even understanding surfing. Very recently, I had this experience with my dad who was hospitalized with COVID. He was intubated for 3 weeks last year. He's 87, unvaccinated, comes off of the vent. And the first thing he says to the doctor is, will I ever play in a symphony orchestra again? And he's been a bass his entire life. And I was like, wow, that's so tragic and so beautiful of like this man who like had his physical, faculties taken away from him. And the first thing he wanted to know is like, can I play music in a symphony again? And I thought to myself, that was me coming out of this 3-week rest. Rest is a generous word. And I was thinking about like, wow, what would be the thing that I would be like most, what I would be most concerned about? And for me, I was like, wow, it'd be surfing for sure. And I almost like dismissed it of like, what a frivolous thing. And I was like, no, that's the answer. There's this thing in my life that just makes me feel so alive and so good. And then again, when I realized that, it's like, oh, well, how do I orient my life around that? Right. So I started having a conversation with my wife, and it's like, hey, I really feel like I need to spend more of our lives like around the ocean. It's really important to me. And fortunately, she's on board with that, but I get to start the conversation to get us there. And now we're in Nosara for a month, and we're, I think that also you take an entrepreneurial approach to parenting and it becomes much easier. It's like, you don't need to do it like it has been done for you, right? It's like the way that we recruit nannies, the way that we co-share with other parents, the way that we recruit nannies like on websites when we're traveling to make sure that we're okay. Of like, there's a resourcefulness to entrepreneurial parenting that we definitely put into play, which makes a big difference. And so
that's awesome. We're gonna have to have another podcast for that. The entrepreneurial parenting podcast. That sounds great. Love to know about sourcing nannies. I think this is really cool. Well, we have just a few minutes left, and I am so grateful for your time, Andrew, and for everyone who's been listening. Don't forget to subscribe, comment, and tag someone who could use this medicine today. I just have a few questions before we go, Andrew, and some fun ones and some deep ones, but we'll do 5 for 5. First of all, what's your daily routine for self-care?
Yeah. So I like to bake in time where I get to hang out with my son. I have a 4.5-year-old son, Hero. So I wake up every morning with him, which is great. I was never able to wake up early like my entire life. It was never something I could do consistently. But now with my son, who needs to be at school by 8 o'clock, I get to do that every single morning. And I know that I know I get an hour with him, right? From 7 a.m. to 8 o'clock. And so I know I have time with him every single day. At the very least, I have an hour with him. So that's how I start my day every morning. I come back. I have 2 meditation practices that I'll do. One is just like a 20-minute insight meditation, just connecting with my breath and my body. The next is I'll do kind of like a Wim Hof guided 15-minute kind of like, more like holotropic with breath holds, more activating. So one is like when I really need energy, I'll go with Wim Hof. When I need calm or like stress relief, I'll go with the insight and the breath. And then when we think about like how to make rituals easy, my mom is on a health and like weight loss journey. And so to support her in that, I've scheduled myself 3 days a week in the morning to go to the gym with her, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So I know that I'm going to get that done.
Wow, that's so cool.
Which is, again, it's nice because it gives us time to connect.
Yeah.
It's like, I just know I'm going to be there. So to have that, it's really special. And then usually how I like to start my day is like, I think this is like Ryan from Daily Stoic, Ryan Holiday, but it's just the idea of like, don't prioritize like your schedule of like the things you have to do today. Schedule your priorities of like just understanding like every single day. If I look at what's going to happen, like what is the most important thing that I can get done today, and just trying to do that thing first. Any day that I do that, I have a great work day. Like any day, what's most important that needs to get done today, and I do that first, I'm going to have a great work day. Usually so much of my life is spent like putting that thing off and doing the things that are easier and like less, less application for me. And so that's there. And then, I got salads for lunch, trying my best to keep low carb, low sugar. And then I'll pick up Hero from school and we'll go swimming and we'll go to soccer and I'll work from the park. And then tonight I have a pickleball tournament with my wife. And there you go.
That sounds awesome. What a fun day. Full life. Yes. And living it. And, it's just great to see proof that you can have fun, you can do what you love, and you can be successful, and you can have a family and all of that. And you can follow your heart. So thank you for doing that, leading by example. Do you have any secret hidden talents?
I definitely have my secret talent, which comes up pretty strictly at talent shows, is one of my best friends in high school was on the BHS team at our high school, which stands for the Black Historical Society. His name was Tyler Green. He was a white man who was the only white man on the Black Historical Society's step team. And in college, he taught me and 15 of our friends how to step. And so my secret talent is that I know how to step, and I have a whole routine that I've put together and brought down at several talent shows.
Hell yeah. Oh, that's amazing. That's
if you ever
awesome.
see me at a talent show for some reason, don't tell people what's coming.
Okay, I won't, but I might have a talent show here in July just so I can see it. If your life were a Hollywood film, what would you name it? What would the title be?
I'd probably say The Art of Loving.
And what if your partner named it? A movie about your life.
The excruciatingly painful and challenging path to loving.
Great.
It would be something similar. I think that we're on a journey together, just to more of that, to being who we are. So I would say, if she were to name it, she would name it. Sometimes she says, "The Best Guy I Know." I think that she would probably call it that.
Oh, that's so sweet. And who would you cast as your parents?
Oh, who would I cast as my parents? I love, what's his name? Oh, I forget his name now. He's the guy who's in Confessions of a Dangerous Mind. You know that actor?
I know of him. I can't think of his name, but that guy. Okay.
That guy. It'd be that guy, and it would be. So it's weird because my parents are like more kind of like Jew, Anglo-Saxon, like mutts, and then Mickey's are Indian and Japanese. I'm trying to think of who could play hers. Who would be a mashup? There's no Japanese Indian celebrities. We're just gonna say, so it would be Jane Fonda for mom.
Nice.
That guy.
That's great. And if you could wave a magic wand and give the world one gift today, what gift would you give us?
It would be the knowledge that they are enough, that there's nothing that they need to do to be enough, to be worthy of love and belonging.
And if everyone knew that they were enough and worthy of love and belonging, what do you see us all doing?
Loving each other a whole lot more. Yeah, when we don't take things personally and are not worried that we're not enough, that we're not lovable, it's so much easier to not take things personally, to just love other people. And I believe that that's more our nature. And so I would say that we would probably do that a lot more easily.
Awesome. Well, I love it. I'm so grateful for your time, Andrew. Before you go, would you say, dude, you're getting well to everyone here for us? Would you be willing to do that?
Dude, you're getting well.
Yes! Thank you, Andrew. It's been a lot of fun and really beautiful and insightful, and I know it'll make a difference for so many people. So again, thank you for being so generous for your time. It's great to connect with you, and I hope to see you in Nosara or Rhinebeck in the near future.
Game on.
Definitely stay in touch, and if there's any way I can support you, let me know.
And if anyone here wants to check out some of our stuff, then I imagine we'll have it in show notes. But
yes, we will.
They're all ITS AndrewHORN. And then for the work of mine, more specifically focused on men's work, we have a nonprofit called the Junto, and that's wejunto.com, wejunto on all social channels, and that's where we post not only our own retreats, but also other resources and events that are coming up that we think are awesome for guys who are on the path, curious about masculinity, personal development, and we would love to connect with anyone interested.
Thank you for saying that. That's the one thing I forgot to ask you. So it's in the comments now, and it's going to be in all the show notes. So if you're looking for Andrew, that is where to find him, right here. And you can always ask me too. Thank you, Andrew. And again, thank you for everyone for being a part of this. You are enough. Have a beautiful day.